Welcome to
Hello.
Celluloid.
Whoops.
Sorry, I didn't realize.
After you. Sorry.
No, let's redo it and you do
Okay.
it because I
Oh no, I'm sorry.
I had a brain fart.
Hello, and welcome to Celluloid Citizens, a podcast about film. I'm Brian O'Connell,
And I'm Sean M. Thompson.
and today we're going to be discussing a science fiction movie from 2018 called Starfish. It was written, directed, scored, and co-edited by A.T. White. That's a lot of work on his part. It shows.
Yeah,
It stars Virginia Gardner, and it was shot by Alberto Benares. So, yeah, kind of a. I don't know if I would call it a smaller crew or anything, but it seems like the product of a few very strong voices rather than a larger, more collaborative production.
yeah. What's interesting is even though the finished product is nothing like a John Carpenter film, the fact that he scored it and also wrote and directed it reminds me of Carpenter.
Yeah, I could see the affinity there that he's so involved in the process right down to the music, yeah. Which I was reading some interviews with him, and he is before he started directing short films and eventually feature films. This is his first feature film. Um he was a musician. So that kind of makes sense when you see the movie because music plays a very heavy role in the narrative as well as just the building the atmosphere.
It does. I mean, it's probably unfair how much this movie impacted me because, like, I don't know, just like on a personal level, I've lost some family members in the last month or so. And just the whole concept of dealing with personal apocalypse while there's like an actual apocalypse is like literally what I'm living through right now. So,
Yeah, yeah. I hadn't considered that the extra resonance of a kind of emptied out world that feels kind of apocalyptic, but yeah, it does have that parallel with what's going on. It's a very, I guess, I think it helps to understand some of the background. He was he wrote the original draft of the screenplay um when his best friend was dying of cancer and he was getting divorced, which is obviously an extremely dark, difficult place to be.
and he
And
said he already had depression on top of it.
yeah,
So,
yeah. And I think he said that the original um, draft was much, much, much rougher and more pessimistic and as it would
I mean,
understandably
from what
be.
I read, the original draft, he went and got a cabin in the mountains of Colorado, and the original draft was just only in an apartment because he was talking with producers, and they were like, "We can't afford to do whatever you want to do." And then they asked him, "Do you have anything that would be cheaper?" And he was like, "Well, here's one where it's like one actress and in an apartment."
Yeah, yeah. And it's not, even though it is I guess it's a sci-fi film. I wouldn't say it really feels like a sci-fi film, and
It
even
feels
the
more like an indie drama.
I would agree. I would characterize it more as an indie drama because even the sci-fi elements aren't really um I don't know how to phrase this. It's it's like they're kind of secondary to the whole thing. And I know people say that about horror movies and I get mad when people say that about horror movies, but in this case it really does feel like the sci-fi elements are just kind of one element among many, many
Yeah, I mean, I will
others.
say, in terms of like Lovecraftian films or cosmic horror films, this is probably one of my new favorites. Just because
It
a
does,
lot of the
yeah.
time I will have trouble actually feeling anything for the characters.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
in this one, it's like obviously like the emotionality is like at the forefront.
Well, yeah, no, it's very it's like almost entirely centered on her feelings. Like it's the whole thing is a very subjective experience of the apocalypse, which I thought was interesting because you usually don't get that with
Yeah,
movies of
normally
this
people
type.
do even if it is
World.
like a first person or subjective thing, eventually they meet up with other people and it becomes this kind of third person
Yeah.
group
Yeah.
narrative. And this was very much like, nope, just the one.
Yeah, and just the one, like, and major props to this actress, Virginia Gardner, who,
She did a
um,
whole film where
it's
I
her.
mean,
It's just her.
there are like cameos of other people, but like it's mainly just her.
Yeah, and it's weighty material, so I commend her, and she does a very good job,
I mean, she does a good job of
just
making you
performing.
feel sympathetic towards a person that, spoilers, obviously, but a person who you pretty much, it's never explicitly stated, but you get the sense that her friend was dying of cancer and she didn't, like, she was too scared to go visit her or talk to
Yeah,
her. You get the sense that her husband killed himself
something like
because
that,
there's a
or
lot of
there was some
this
sort of
really cool shot. Actually, it's one of the cooler effects I've seen where it's like he turns and it's like his face is just missing, but the blood is sort of like leaking up. Yeah,
dripping.
like it's
Yeah, yeah,
almost
yeah.
like a zero gravity thing.
Yeah, I those aesthetic flourishes were very impressive. And it is low on special effects, but when it does make use of them, they're very, very well
I mean,
deployed, I
I've at
think.
first I thought they were gonna, and wisely by the way, when there's indie films, I much prefer when they kind of have things hinted at because they don't have the budget
Yeah,
than when they just like try to
show
show
you.
you everything even
Yeah.
though they know they don't have the budget.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
thought, but you know what? The CG, like, I don't know what their budget was, but it still looks pretty good.
Yeah, especially there's a kind of gigantic, almost caterpillar like creature that shows up midway through that's glowing, and it's like it's huge and it looked really impressive. It looked like it could be in a big budget film to
I
me,
know. What's interesting
which
about this film is, like, rather than playing all of the cosmic horror Lovecraftian stuff
mm-hmm.
as horrific, which it does sometimes it just plays into just sheer awe. Like, the enormous creature you
Yeah.
see is, like, really beautiful. It's got these, like, really colorful kind of pinks and blues and oranges inside of its,
Yeah.
like, stomach.
Yeah. And she just watches it. It's not
And
like a
yeah, it doesn't go
terror
after her
thing.
or anything.
No. It's I mean, and also just getting into the visual elements, it is very visually beautiful. Like there's a nice layer of grain to it. The shots are well composed. It's the colors are muted, but it's still like a colorful movie in a lot of
I mean, I
ways.
guess my
So
only
it's
critique would be anytime you're in a building, it's like so Instagrammable.
yeah,
But you know
that's true.
what? I mean, like at the same
It
time,
is
like it
what it
looks
is.
appealing. That's why those things take off on Instagram because they make you like want to live in that room.
Yeah. Then why shouldn't we
Yeah,
have
you
that
know,
at the
and it's
movies?
kind of a it's a dumb critique too. I'll admit to that. That's sort of me just
Sometimes no, sometimes things can overdo it, but here, it's just I don't know. I enjoyed the aesthetic
yeah, I mean, like
pleasure
so
at
much of
play
it too
even.
is inside of the apartment, so it's like I can't begrudge anybody for making it look like very nice.
Yeah. It has to well, I mean you want it to be interesting if half of your movie
Yeah, no,
is
it's
going to be
true.
in there. Yeah. So you recommended this movie to me. I don't know if you'd seen it
No, no, I went
before.
in. The backstory is like it was one that's on my Hulu's list, and my girlfriend was like, "I don't want to watch this because this seems very depressing," and it just became this thing where it'd be like, "Let's watch," and she'd be like, "No, it seems very depressing." Um, so finally, I was
And it
like,
is
"Okay, well, why don't I just watch it with Brian?"
yeah, I mean, I hadn't. The thing that surprised me was that it feels very much, at least to me, of a piece with certain sci-fi movies we've had in the past few years, like more overtly sci-fi, but like Arrival or Annihilation was a film I thought of a few times.
Yeah, and I really love that style of, and I hate the term weird, but I do love that
Yeah,
style of like weird sci-fi. But like, I really like that those
yeah,
films all they actually like have characters like dealing with uh, emotions and dealing with past transgressions and like getting into the
yeah,
human psychology because a lot of the time what
yeah.
takes me out of a genre film, and I'm sorry to admit this, is
Mhm.
if it's not if there's not enough characterization. If I don't care about the character, it's like so many of them they're so focused on the actual like nuts and bolts of like the monster or like the jump scares or
Well,
whatever, and
yeah,
nothing's wrong with that.
yeah,
But you watch,
and
yeah, you
that's
watch enough of that, you're like, yeah, okay, I got it. You scared me.
well, that's also what, especially I find it to be a personal issue for me with a lot of sci-fi is that it winds up getting focused on like I mean, world building is important and interesting and it's valuable. And I like some movies that are more focused on world building, but sometimes the characters just kind of get lost in the you know, kind of glitzy
I mean, I think
elements
in
of
general, what
genre.
we run into, which drives me nuts, is like people are so reliant, especially when you get to a bigger budget, on CG that when you get to a sci fi film, a lot of the time,
Yeah.
it is like mostly just watching the CG elements, and then the actors are sort of in the background, or at least like they're sharing the screen. But, you know, it's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
I mean, if I wanted that, I could play a video game. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah, it's and I don't necessarily like we do have impressive technologies and it is fun to see the spectacle I guess sometimes that you can create, but like especially I find that it winds up sometimes like just reducing the characters to like plot devices at a
yeah,
certain
no, I
point.
would say, I mean, I'm so story focused. I'm a writer, like, obviously, we're
Yeah,
both
yeah.
writers, but um, I don't know. Yeah, first and foremost, I'm a story person, and so when it's like when you can tell that like from a script level, it like holds up. Like if it's generally the rule I think is if you could read the script and like be entertained by it without any of the visuals,
Yeah.
I feel like that's sort of what I look for nowadays.
I can see that. I can see that. I know films where it's been all in the execution, and if I just read it as a script, it would be
Yeah, I guess
boring.
that's not entirely fair
But
because there are very
but
cinematic
no no
films
but
that like if you read them, you'd be like, well, what is this?
no but I get what you're saying in that the script is the foundation for the film. You know, it has to and again it was in this case for me. I didn't necessarily the narrative elements didn't really entirely cohere for me, and that I think was maybe part of the intention. But the character, it was really nice to see a science fiction film that was so rooted in this, like really, really rooted in this one person's experience and emotions, and have that all of the more you know, genre or whatever you want to call them elements be directly informed by those feelings. It was, in fact, actually, I mentioned the other movies, but the film that this really reminded me of most of the time while watching it, although it isn't as totally harsh as that film, is was Melancholia by Lars
Oh,
von
okay, yeah, I could
Trier.
see that.
In that Melancholia isn't about grief, but it is also a very psychological, ambiguous take on one person's experience of the apocalypse at a dark moment in their life. And I feel like I caught one or two, maybe I was mistaken, but like the title cards of this film especially like evoked the opening of Melancholia to me a little bit.
Yeah, I could see
And I
that.
felt like it just felt like in like like Virginia Gardner and Kristen Stewart, their performances are kind of kindred spirits. But that was just but it is a very unique film and it surprised me at several points. in terms of also just its formal experimentation.
Yeah, that was,
I
I mean, that was
think,
another thing is like it just shifts so much. Like I expected there to be
yeah,
some experimental elements because I'd seen the trailer and I knew it was like she was alone, kind of wandering around, finding tapes and
yeah,
figuring out how to deal with an apocalypse that way. And I knew it was vaguely
yeah, yeah,
Lovecraftian from the title. Um,
yeah,
but
yeah,
at
yeah.
one point she
But
turns into a cartoon.
yeah, that really, and I kind of enjoyed that. It was like, oh, it's like a thing I was not expecting at all. And it's really well animated as well. It's not like sometimes these movies that, dabble in animation, of which there are very few, um, like it's kind of shoddy
Right,
animation
yeah.
because they didn't put as much effort into it as the film itself. But in this case, it's like it's colorful, it's well animated, it fits with the music that's playing at that moment. I just it was like, oh, it was like one of those rare things you get where a film is just like it surprises you in a way that not just in like a narrative way, just as like, oh, this is something different
And yeah,
now.
they do a couple things like that. Like the very one of the very last shots, it switches to black and white. There's a really
Yeah.
sort of cute moment where she wakes up in the library and it's like all the equipment is like shown and like there's a thing that says, Starfish on
A
it and
clapper.
yeah, there's a clapboard and
Yeah,
like she sees the crew and everything and she sees the actress playing her and then
yeah,
she comes to and it's just like like
yeah. I kind of liked those breaks
I just think
in the
otherwise it would have
narrative.
been too, I don't know, like too, I hesitate to say boring, but it would have been very,
Like
yeah.
contained
And I
almost.
love contained narratives, by the way. I mean, anyone who's read any of my books would know that.
Mm-hmm.
I have my novel mostly taking place in an apartment. I have one that takes place in a
Yeah.
lockdown prison. So like I love that contained narrative thing, but I read an interview with him and I think he was right. He said like it would have been too mopey and depressing if it was just the woman lamenting
Yeah.
her dead friend in the apartment.
Yeah, I could see that. And I also wanna say that I really liked the film in terms of its, especially its formal elements. It isn't for me like a new favorite personally. I feel like I I don't know. I feel like on some level, and maybe this is because of my own personal lack of experience in a lot of things, but I feel like I failed to totally connect with it at certain points. But it is something that really breaks the mold and is, especially with him doing all of the work in terms of the writing and
I
the
mean, I was
directing and
impressed that
the
like I enjoyed the score so much.
yeah, the score is quite beautiful.
And the
The score
soundtrack
is
too.
quite
I mean,
beautiful.
some of it's a little like hipstery indie rock for me, but I still enjoyed
Well,
it.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it is it's a film that really I was kind of like, and reading the interviews with him, it becomes even more clear. It is definitely the product of a really personal
I mean, the fact that he
experience.
chose to
Like,
put based on a true story at the beginning, because it's
yeah,
like
yeah,
it does confuse you because you're like, well, what part?
yeah. Well, I mean,
Obviously, the
obviously
the
not the.
friend part, but like the fact that he chose to put that shows that it's important to him to tell the story behind it.
Yeah, and he talks about like the wolf head in some of the interviews, and people were asking him what that meant, and he said it's just kind of like a personal thing that he isn't really willing to disclose information about. But I feel that the film is filled with stuff like that, like stuff that has a very deep meaning to the person who made it, and that's kind of this isn't a criticism at all. I'm saying that it felt like he wasn't thinking about the audience too much. It was that he was kind of trying to work out these emotions
No, I
himself
think
and
one of the
put
more
them.
telling thing is is I read a Dread Central interview with him where he said like he didn't expect this would get made. It was kind of just like he had to do it to like process
Like a
everything he was going
therapeutic.
through.
Yeah.
And you can
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah, that
tell, I mean, like, not to critique, and like, obviously it's fine to make your film and just want to make it, like, just based on
yeah.
stuff that isn't personal. And obviously it's fine to write stuff that isn't personal and everything. But it's like, I don't know. I have a personal respect for people that put themselves out there like that. Because it's so much
Yeah, oh
easier to
yeah.
just lie and be like, oh, it's not me.
Or make something that would have been a more immediately accessible story about grief, or like, something that's more
Yeah, like
maybe like
the intentional vagueness and like the kind of breakdown of the narrative, I
mhm.
feel like when it's done poorly it's awful, but when it's done
Yes.
well, like in this film I think it's executed well. I like it. It sort of
Yeah.
mirrors the breakdown of reality she's experiencing.
And it feels true to her experience at this moment. And I've especially since I started studying like Hanukkah's theories about film, and you know how to represent darker or transgressive elements of life in film. Like I feel it's almost kind of obscene, especially when you're dealing with something like grief, to render these elements like palatable to an audience. Like there's so many schmaltzy movies about losing a loved one that don't really do justice to the
Well,
experience and
because
the
yeah,
emotions of the people involved. They're
they're
trying
like
they're
trying to
like
make the
it's like
audience like feel better about themselves.
feel better. It's also
It's trying
just
to be, and
like
there's nothing wrong with
to
trying to do
sell
the
stuff,
whole, yeah, like
honestly.
there's nothing wrong with trying to do the triumph of the human spirit thing. But I think
Yeah.
what you run into sometimes when you have that style of narrative is it's sort of like when people are depressed and the advice they always get is like, well, just snap out of it, just smile. And it's like
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah, yeah.
appreciate films that are like, hey, you're grieving, you're depressed. Like this film is for you. It's not trying to tell you to not feel that way. It's just like this is sort of what it's like.
Yeah, and it's not, and it even goes beyond just the triumph of the human spirit thing, because I do think this film could be interpreted as having a kind of ambiguously positive ending. It's
No, it
kind of
does have a
unclear, but
weirdly. I mean, one thing I totally didn't expect from this film is it's very cute. Like, which was
yeah,
so not
yeah,
like, like I normally hate.
the
Yeah,
turtle.
the turtle is very cute. I normally kind of hate the trend lately of like doing the like dark fairy tale thing, but it's like I felt like
Yeah,
it snuck up on you and it wasn't advertising it like that, but so much of it, like, the wolf head she's wearing, like the turtle she's bringing
yeah,
around everywhere, or like collecting the tapes, and it has like sort
yeah,
of this
yeah,
weird um magical realism, like modern
yeah.
fairy tale
Well,
thing going on.
that's the thing. I ultimately we I again, you and I have talked before about how awful and inane it is when people say like elevated this, or
Right. I
like,
mean, that's just a personal
post
tick for
that.
me. I don't like. It's just a semantic thing.
But this film really did feel like a psychological drama, in that it felt like it was taking place inside her head, and all of these memories and experiences and like thoughts are kind of blurring together, because they don't really explain fully what's going on at any point,
No,
in
they
terms
don't
of just
explain. Like, there's a lot of stuff where she'll be like sort of sitting there and start playing a tape, and the music will start, and then she's just transported to a completely different place, and then the
yeah,
song
yeah,
stops,
yeah.
and she's just like back where she was.
And they don't, and they it's not like they say, oh, like they came from space and they're invading, and or like, like they we know the tapes have something to do with it, but they don't fully explain like the function of the tapes, and like
No, there's a
in a
vague thing about a
full way.
signal and how
and a door opening and closing, but it's not. They don't spell it out for you, which is a good thing in a film like this. But it felt also true to the way that the character is in kind of this blurry, vague state in her life where it's clearly a period of mourning and transition, and this, to me, the ending almost feels like the old version of her is passing so that something new can, like, she can move forward, or something. Maybe that's too
No, it
like
seems like that's fairly accurate. I
positive.
mean, like, I just appreciate like the quirkiness of the film. Like, one of the first
Yeah.
lines of dialogue she has is they don't, you don't realize this until she's like talking on the walkie-talkie trying to like reach out to someone. But she's like, I just broke into my dead friend's apartment. And that's pretty much the first time you
Yeah.
realize, like, oh, she just broke into
Yeah.
her dead friend's apartment. I
Yeah.
mean, I
It's
mean, I guess you
she's
could have inferred it, but I was thinking maybe it's like her restaurant or her family's or something.
I didn't realize it was her
I thought
friend's
they did a good
apartment
job
until
of
she
sort of
said that.
having that like reveal where she's like, "Oh yeah, I broke into my dead friend's apartment," and then you're like, "Oh God!" Like,
Yeah, she's really been wounded by this situation. So it is very it's very emotional and a very character based
but the thing
film.
is,
It's
yeah,
like
but the
I would say it's a
sci-fi
character
elements though,
study.
it's like when they're there, they're very strong. Like I think pound for
Oh
pound, it can
yes.
hold its own with like I don't know any of the more recent sci-fi I've seen.
Yeah, oh yeah. It's very well done and well deployed. And it's good creature design in terms of, especially I like the giant glowing thing that crawls along the town, but also the head that drips blood and everything. Like they do those elements very very well. And I mean, yeah, it's just it sets out to tell this story, and it tells it very very well.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
like
kind of,
some of the stuff I appreciated too was just aesthetically. Like at times it reminded me
yeah.
of Silent Hill, which I was not expecting.
He said in several interviews that Silent Hill is an influence,
Like
I
in terms
think.
of the, well, it makes sense because Silent Hill is all about, and I'm such a nerd, but I've watched a lot of YouTube videos like explaining what they think Silent Hill is about. And they get into how every person sort of sees different things in Silent Hill, and it's just a very personal.
Mm.
So, like, that makes sense. It's like, oh, like, like
Yeah, yeah.
someone's dealing with personal stuff and then they see this stuff. But just the character design in terms of or the creature design, just the weird kind of arms trapped in an amniotic sac kind of a thing. That's very
Yeah,
Silent
yeah,
Hill. But
yeah.
then in a weird way, it also reminded me of this indie game I love called The Long Dark, where
Oh, I've heard of that, I
it's
think.
basically a survival game, but it's like it's called The Acquired Apocalypse, and it's like there's no more electricity, nothing works anymore, and the wildlife is sort of turning against you, and there's this weird sort of like northern lights thing that happens but it never explains what happened.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
similar in that it's like taking place in the Canadian wilderness, and it's like there's snow on the ground, and it's just
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
aesthetically,
I
yeah.
I appreciated how desolate the whole thing was. It was satisfying. I mean, they really create that atmosphere of loneliness and isolation, and you know, no, she doesn't really see anybody after like half an hour
No,
into
she
the
hears
film.
people,
Like,
but
yeah, and you kind of catch glimpses, but outside of that, and we never really. The thing that I found that I was surprised by is that I never really found myself wondering where everybody went or anything. It felt right that she was just this lone person wandering through this kind of
It did feel
wasteland,
right,
the
and I like
snow
that
is
at
so
the
nice.
end they sort of turn that on its head, where she's talking to someone and she's like, "I thought everyone was dead," and the guy's like, "Why would you think that?" And it is sort of like, "Yeah, why would
Yeah,
you think that?" It's like, "Are you the only one that went for shelter?"
yeah,
But
yeah,
it kind of
yeah,
speaks to like
yeah,
someone who's like so out of it with like grief that they just like
yeah.
don't think about.
They're not
Right, they're
processing
not thinking
things.
clearly. And I sort of appreciated the whole. It's not much of a twist. You could sort of see it coming, but the whole she plays the signal again, and someone on the radio or over the walkie is being like, "So you just opened the door again. Like you sent the signal back to them. Like you're not
Yeah.
saving the world. You opened that door again."
Yeah, and I loved how he was like, so you collected all of these tapes and you didn't know what they do and you just played them with that thing. Because that's kind of the position the audience has been in as well. Like you're kind of with her on the journey to like, okay, we'll get these
Right.
tapes. But you never really know what's gonna happen when you play all of the all of the tapes, and it turns out to be um in that guy's opinion, massively
I mean,
bad.
I
That
think
he's
in an objective opinion, it would be massively bad if it was like the first time a bunch of people
yeah.
died. Then obviously it's not a. Um,
Round
but
two
yeah,
is
no, and
not going to be nice.
I just liked how
Well,
it was like primarily an indie drama that, because it's like I have a hard
yeah,
time with Lovecraftian films in general because a lot
yeah,
of them
yeah,
are
yeah,
so
yeah.
focused on like the tropes themselves. Like a lot of them are so like it's fish people or what, and even from a
Or they just go like camp with
yeah, and
them,
there's
which
nothing
I
wrong. Like
mean,
I
it
love
can be
Reanimator, don't get
okay.
me wrong, but it's like I don't know.
I haven't seen the Nick Cage Color Out of Space, but I hear
It's
that
pretty
that is
ridiculous.
also
I was
very
entertained, but it's pretty ridiculous.
well. No, I mean it's so the thing I also would mention is that there is a place for ridiculous high sci-fi,
No, I think
over
what
the
I like
top
about this
stuff.
is it's a
Like
counterpoint. Like, because you don't often get
yeah,
the indie drama that also has Lovecraftian elements. And I sort
yeah,
of
yeah, yeah,
appreciate
yeah.
that that's a new thing because, like, on a very personal level, like that resonates with me much more. Um,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
also just from a nerd
It,
perspective, like I appreciate that there
it's
were
like it's
like
cool.
Lovecraftian monsters in the snow. You almost never get that. It's
Yeah,
always they want to do it exactly, oh, it's on the coast, it's on the ocean.
yeah, or the woods or something. I liked the snow. The snow really it
I'm a
helped
weird,
with the
like, I don't know.
whole.
I grew up in Massachusetts and, like, even though when you're living through a winter, it sucks, it's cold, it's very beautiful, the snow on the ground kind of a thing. And
Yeah,
any film that
yeah,
does that, if it's in any way good, I usually like it. Like, The Thing, part of my love of that is just there's snow everywhere.
yeah, yeah. It's I don't want to say it's underused because I feel
I mean,
like a
tons
lot
of
of
stuff
films take
happens
place
in the
in the snow.
snow, but I mean, like,
But it felt like a very important part of the texture here of just the whole
yeah, and I mean,
experience, which a
speaking
lot of films.
also personally, like, I mean, I know this film won't be for everyone, but like on a very personal level, it was like, dude, I live in Santa Fe now, so I live in the mountains. Like that's sort of what it looks like around where I live. I mean, in the
Yeah,
winter. Um,
yeah,
and Colorado
yeah,
is like different enough, but it was like, okay, so it's a grieving person living in the mountains, who's dealing with a personal apocalypse while there's a apocalypse around. Like, I don't know, give it 5 months, that will be me.
yeah.
I mean, hopefully not
You
with
got getting
giant,
your wolf
weird
skin ready.
caterpillar creatures, but
Yeah. Oh, fingers. Well, you never know what 2020 is gonna throw at you.
seriously.
Giant weird caterpillar creatures are not off the table yet, but yeah. No, I can see. I can imagine this striking of as it did for you a very personal chord with a lot of people, especially if they've lost a loved one. So I mean, I guess I don't have too much to say about the film, but kind of bringing it to the last act of this episode or whatever. I would highly recommend this even if it doesn't wind up being your thing because one, I just feel like I hadn't heard of this and nobody seems to talk
Yeah, the
about it.
weirdest thing
So,
was like I think I heard one person talking about this film, but if you I've go through sometimes like best films on Hulu or like sci-fi films on streaming, and it keeps coming up, but it's like none of my peers are talking about it, which was confusing to me.
yeah, and with the, I mean, with the film circles we traffic in, like this type of movie, which is like, there's exploration of grief and trauma through genre tropes, is like, it's like the thing right now.
Yeah, so it's
It's
confusing that it's not bigger, but I don't know, sometimes it's just I mean, again, getting personal with it. I have to think that sometimes you put out material and it just doesn't hit immediately. That happens all the
yeah,
time.
maybe, but I think this one will be discovered eventually,
I
if
think
that
within a
makes
couple of
sense.
years, there are films that immediately you get like a lot of styles of film, right? You get the ones that take off
Right, right.
immediately and are just super huge, and then in 5 years, no one talks about it anymore, which is fine. That's
Yeah.
absolutely fine. Then you also get stuff like this, where it's like when it comes out, like this came out in 2018. I didn't watch it until 2020.
No, yeah,
And I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
like, it was probably only available streaming maybe in 2019. But it's still been like a year of me, like, more or less seeing it, I think.
Yeah. And
So there are films where it's like they come out and just for whatever reason, they don't immediately take off. But once they sort of slowly build, people really like, I could see me watching this again in 10 years and still enjoying it just as much.
yeah. I mean, even like with the more indie experimental kind of quirky elements, I could see this gaining like a small like cult following, honestly. Like, with the animation and all of those kind of interesting breaks, that it almost at points, especially with the songs, it almost feels music video like,
Yeah,
which
which
is
I don't mind.
I
Again, I
don't
feel like
mind
when it's done
that.
poorly, it's awful, but when it's done well, I like it.
Agreed, agreed. Yeah, no, and it's just kind of nice to have that kind of reflective space in a film, because usually it's just like narrative, narrative, narrative,
I
or
mean, I'm
like,
honestly impressed because, like, even if I was approaching something like this, like, you're so focused on, okay, what is the monster going to be? Like, where does she hide? Like, what are
mm-hmm.
the horror or sci fi elements? And it must be so difficult to just be like, no, it's a drama, but they happen to be there.
Yeah, yeah.
Because, a
But
producer probably
again,
isn't saying, like, yes, they're probably like, more monster. Like, what are you doing?
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's, again, I know he reworked it to make it give it a little more general shape, but, and again, this is not a criticism. I get the sense he was writing for himself from the depths of his soul at
I
that
mean, I
moment,
honestly, that's like, a lot of the time I prefer that. Because it's like, even if it doesn't resonate with me, I have much more respect for someone that's like, I don't really care if you like it. Like, this is what I had to do. Than someone who is
Yeah,
like trying to go off of trends like, oh, it's the kooky dark fairy tale and there's comedic elements. Not to
yeah, yeah,
rag on anybody, but like,
yeah.
what it's like.
Well, I mean, it kind of reminds me of Ari Aster in some ways, who also wrote his two screenplays in the aftermath of personal loss or tragedy or
But I feel
whatever.
like that's why I like
And
Ari Aster because it's very similar in terms of like actually getting into the emotions of these characters, but then there also happens to
yeah,
be horror stuff.
yeah, and Ari Aster is ultimately, I think, thinking about the audience at some at some
Right.
stage, because his films have are and he proudly does this, and I think he does it very well. He is drawing on familiar structures of, horror subgenres, but which this film doesn't really draw on. Like, it has Lovecraftian elements, but it's not as much of a direct blueprint as
I
they
mean,
are
before we
as
end,
like folk
actually, I
horror
was
is.
curious what you thought about the title and what you thought about the final shot with the starfish in the bottom of the tank, and then it's like the jellyfish look
Yeah,
like they're dead.
I don't know. I it was one of those interesting things. Like when you first see the starfish and the jellyfish,
I mean,
I kind
I
of
will
felt
profess
that.
ignorance. I didn't even know the jellyfish ate starfish.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, I think that's what's going on. I I when I first saw them, I thought they were kind of there for just kind of alien
Right, to
ambience
kind of
because
mirror the
jellyfish are
Lovecraftian, like they're fishy monster type things.
just
They're just cool
cool
to
to
look
look
at,
at.
yeah.
And yeah, but I'm not sure. I don't know. There are a lot of things in this film that I feel are kind of obscure, not obscure maybe, but ambiguous or kind of cryptic elements. So I'm not sure
I mean, the
exactly.
way I interpreted it, and this could be wrong, is that the main character is the starfish. Like she's thrown into this world that like should be eating her,
Hmm.
and then at the end you realize it's not, and that she's actually able to keep going and like
Yeah. Yeah.
in a way that maybe even the things that are bigger than her and trying to destroy her aren't.
Yeah. That makes a lot of
Because it would speak
sense.
to why
That
she
that
would
would
like intentionally hop into this weird portal thing. Like I know it's up to interpretation, but I almost feel like she didn't die. Like she just got out of it and was just like, cool.
Yeah, I don't it's not it's again, it's like it's an ambiguous thing. What it's clear is that it's a moment of change. It's not necessarily a negative change or a positive change, but she's moving into something new, which I think is aptly reflected by that final shot. And again, also just to, you know, I don't necessarily think everything in this film has a one-to-one
No, I don't think
allegorical
so.
meaning, but it does. I don't know how I'm trying to sum this up. It has this truth to it, I guess, in the way it depicts this person's emotional state that you might not, you often don't get in more direct films that like directly deal with the iconography of grief or whatever. Like it's it has a an honesty, if that
No,
makes
it does.
sense.
And I appreciated that it's not. I mean, if you actually interpret it how I interpret it, it's a deeply flawed character because I'm pretty sure what was implied was that she cheated on her husband with her best friend. There's
Yeah,
a lot of hints
yeah,
that like they were maybe more than friends,
yeah,
and that the
yeah,
husband like fucking blew his head off because of it.
yeah. She's certainly like dealing with an element of guilt during this whole
And
film.
she just does
So,
stuff that's like there's a telescope that's set up on the neighbor's window. And granted, you find out that's
yeah,
obviously
yeah,
her friends, but like she still like peeps on some people and she's like, you pervert. And it's like, what the hell's wrong
yeah,
with you? Like she breaks into an apartment, like
yeah, yeah. I mean, she's not in a stable place in her life, and she's clearly made mistakes and has is not operating like, you know, the other guy who she keeps hearing on the phone, who's like a clear like pragmatist who's just trying to get things done. But that's I would imagine that's true to somebody who's in a state of deep depression and mourning. Um so I mean, yeah, I mean, I would just say watch the
yeah, I would
film
say watch the
and
film. It definitely resonated with me because of stuff that's been going on with me, but I think even if that wasn't, it still would have. I
yeah,
really
yeah.
like these very deeply personal, like, I'm just a, I'm a fan of films that have the balls to like have one character and just hold on them
Yeah,
because
that's
it's so rare, and or even a
hard.
narrative with
It's
just one
difficult.
character, it's so rare because everyone knows if you put more people into it there's a social element, and the more social the film is the more people want to see it so they can be social and talk to their friends about
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. This
And
is
whereas
a
this one's just like, hey, it's a lady in an apartment.
it's profoundly
It's very
antisocial.
antisocial, yes.
which is not, again, not a criticism in this case, but it's one person's journey, and it's really one person's journey, and that is rare, and it's also very difficult to pull off
And I
well.
thought he did,
And
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, in general, like, I'm very excited to see what this guy does next. He's definitely
absolutely.
joined the
I
ranks
think
of like an Ari Aster for me, or like, I mean, I'm blanking on other names right now, or
Eggers maybe.
the guy who did Killing of a Sacred Deer.
Lanthimos,
Lanthimos, yeah,
Yorgos
like
Lanthimos.
I appreciate when there's a filmmaker like that where they're so strong that I'm like, I will just follow you whatever you do.
Yeah, I am very much looking forward to his next film. I personally, for me, and again, it may be, just where I'm at in with my life and experiences, or it may just be taste. It didn't fully break through into being a huge like wow thing for me personally, but it's still a very impressive film, and I would say definitely like an underrated gem in a lot of ways. Like people need to go see
Yeah,
this
that's
and
my main.
talk
One of
about
my
it.
other takeaways is just like I don't know why everyone and their mom isn't talking about this film in terms of like my peer circle because it's like, isn't this your
Yeah,
thing? Like,
this is exactly your thing. I would love to read like so many like think pieces written on it, or like analyses. I feel like there's a really awesome discussion that's waiting to be had about this that I
yeah,
haven't
that's what I
seen yet.
appreciate about
So
the film too. Is like I feel like I could rewatch it and like take new things from it, and
yeah,
like that I could write like a longer thing about it.
yeah. It's rich in terms of possible interpretations
It's
or
just very
subtexts,
layered.
or
Yeah.
yeah. So please watch it, and let us know what you think if you do watch it. We're looking for people to talk about it with, and I mean, yeah, just it's a good movie.
Yeah, no, it's a good film. Go
That's all
watch
there is
it.
to say.
So that's probably gonna wrap it up. I'm gonna do a quick plug for the Patreon. Hopefully, by the time this episode's out in like 2 years. No, I'm kidding. There will be some more episodes on the Patreon and just more episodes in general. Our main home on the internet, in terms of social media, is on Twitter at Celluloid Sits with a Z. Come talk to us. I mean, I have no life, so I'll talk to anyone. And we're on anchor.fm/celluloid sits, I think is what it is. I should have this written down somewhere so I can,
I think it
but I
is
think it's
celluloid
sits. I wanted
sits.
to, it's so dumb, but I was like, if it's CITZ, then it's easier for people to remember. And yet I never remember. But anyway, yes, those are the homes. And yeah, I hope more people, listen and interact in the coming months.
Please, we're so
I'm so
lonely.
goddamn lonely.
But until then, we hope to see you there. And yeah, I've been Brian
And I'm
O'Connell,
Sean M. Thompson.
and thank you for listening.